I'll do a quick intro. So you are the serial cyber CMO, and we'll talk about cyber reason and hunters and dig and then we'll just kind of roll with what we discussed yesterday and
Excellent.
open for questions. If the audience is shy and doesn't have questions, then we can. I have plenty of my own, and then we'll talk about your show, and but I'm sure we'll have a good session.
Yes, looking forward.
Excellent. So if it's okay with everyone, I see people are starting to file in. If you can think of questions for Lital, and meanwhile, if you could put yourself on mute, and then we'll have a Q&A session in the end. And maybe we'll give a minute or two for other people to join, and we'll get going. And again, just to kind of to set the stage, the timing of this discussion is specifically before Thanksgiving, because I know a lot of people are considering their 2025 plans, and Lital and I connected and discussed the fact that often the playbooks that used to work a couple of years ago are not performing very well. And it's always an interesting discussion to figure out what is what is working and how to think about deploying not infinite budget in 2025. So that's kind of to set the stage, and specifically we want to address some of the ways to make live events, whether it's dinners, large conferences, local conferences, how to make them work, and by work, I mean how to produce pipeline. So 301, maybe we'll give one more minute for everyone, and we'll start.
And thank you, Misha, for hosting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Pleasure.
I know that you have very strong opinions and you're not afraid to share them. That's why I think the conversation with you is always interesting, and I appreciate you taking time for this.
Appreciate it. I hope people find it informing.
All right, so with 302, today we're very lucky to have Lital for this session. Lital is a serial cyber CMO, amazing career from cyber reason to hunters to dig security, recently acquired, to now Lital is Chief Marketing Officer at Beyond Identity. You've seen it all, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, specifically around, as I mentioned, some of the playbooks from yesteryear, from whether it's CEO, outbound, content plays, they're not performing or not performing as well. And more people are looking at live events, from small scale or intimate events, intimate dinners, or large scale events like industry conferences like Black Hat or RSA, looking at that space. What are your thoughts in 2025?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really interesting. Overall, we see the cost of marketing going up. Nothing has been cheap. And like with inflation, I think our cost is increasing significantly from participation in the large events. We've seen, all vendors after the pandemic increase the cost of RSA, Black Hat, Gartner conferences significantly, like from your booth all the way to the bench scanner. Everything has become so expensive, not to mention, the cost of travel and staying there, as well as Google ads, LinkedIn ads. Everything is costly. And at the same time, I think with, the slowdown that we all seen in the last few years in tech buying, we all are being scrutinized on return on investment on every dollar we spend on marketing. And I think marketeers have been pushed to really think of what's performing and not just go with whatever playbook that we have. And it is leading all of us to think about what every activity generates in terms of pipeline, how fast the pipeline converts, how fast it closes, and really looking at which channels perform. And I think you're really right that when you start scrutinizing it, you see that not all channels are the same. Some perform better, some perform worse. We have seen, I think, across the board, a decline in the performance of trade show booths and just scanning of leads over there. Might bring a lot of velocity in terms of people walking in the booth, but at the end of the day, you give away your swag and it not necessarily leads to a deal closed whatever time afterwards. So I think the last few years were kind of like the whole world of marketing has shifted. And at the end of the day, it's a good thing that we're all being scrutinized to think what's working, what's the role of each activity and every channel that we're using in the overall life cycle of a customer, and kind of like putting a mark of how to use them and how to mix them all together in a way that, you know, some activities will not generate pipe but are needed for you to build awareness for your brand and they're table stakes, versus some activities that you can just eliminate because they're not relevant anymore these days. I think we all have been discussing decline in email marketing and what's the role of it. I think it has a role to play, for example, in customer marketing, because your customers do expect you to lend with your news and provide them with insight of how to leverage your software, while people that are completely cold will not look at your email landing in the mailbox, and it may be just going directly into the spam mail. So the challenge is, on one hand, I think our CFOs are asking for ROIs. And I think the other side of the challenge that we're facing is that we all vendors compete on the attention span of our customers, and it is declining. There are probably 1,000 cybersecurity vendors that might be in different niche and not directly competing with me, but the messaging at the end of the day sounds the same. We are competing on similar buckets of budgets. And at the end of the day, the thing we are competing most about is the attention span, the time that our customers have to provide us to actually consider what we say, what's a story, how are we different, and if they want to continue talking to us. And that's the hardest thing to compete on, the time and the attention. So I think that's kind of like what we're talking about is like when I'm planning for 2025, I'm really thinking about how do I get in front of my customers, my ideal customers. What are the tools that I need? What is the messaging? And most importantly, how will I get quality time to actually get into the mindset where most of them are like us, extremely busy, have a full day of Zooms, for years now having a Zoom fatigue, and just being busy and overwhelmed.
Interesting. It's definitely a perspective that we're hearing a lot. And kind of to double click on some of the things that you said. So you brought up CFOs, and CFOs looking for like what's the least amount of money we can invest and the fastest payback, which is it's some of the constraints that are not always easy to fulfill. And with events, the way I think about events, it's actually really two questions. Question number one, will the right people show up? And the question number two, if they do show up, will they convert? And it's interesting that we often find that at any given point in time, a very small fraction of your total addressable market of your ICP accounts are showing intent. Sometimes some people say it's 3 to 5%. And those are the ones you really want to get in the room, but there's so few of them. So naturally, you probably also want to engage the 95, 97% who are your ideal customers. They're just not quite ready to go into POC in 2 months. But those probably will get contacted by whether your SDRs or maybe they receive content or they stop by the booth at Black Hat. So from the moment you engage with them at a live event to the moment an SDR calls them a year later and books them for a demo, There could be, I know, multiple touches. How do you think about combining this reality when not everyone in UICP are showing intent, and how to deploy your budget and how to pick events both in terms of scope, small dinners, one-on-ones, large regional conferences, large-scale conferences. What's your decision-making process and how to use this reality and deploy your budget? You mentioned some of the larger scale events, like investing in large scale events may not produce the results that we want, but how do you weave all this together if you look in 2025?
That's an excellent question, and let's unpack a few of those concepts. I think the most important realization is what you're saying here, what you said at the beginning about people that are in market versus people that will be in market in the future, and thinking of the market that way. And I always say marketing is probably the only one in the organization that can have the longer term play. So as you said, probably in most of our cases, most of the software vendors deal with about 5 to 10% of the ideal customer that is currently in market, ready to buy, maybe looking for something. And yes, the challenge is let's get in front of them. Let's get in front of them before my competition does. Let's make sure we kind of like one of those that they're considering. In most cases, this is probably too late. They already have, especially if you are not well-established brand, they will go to your more established competition as a default that's in the list. So we need to be before that 5%, before that, ahead of time. If you actually think about the long term is not huge. Like if you're in a market like the one I'm playing in, most contracts are 3 years contracts. So within the next 3 years, each company will either renew with its current vendor, or they will look to replace, maybe kind of like consider a replacement. So actually, it's not a huge long term. Yes, it is a long term for the CFO that needs to leave in the next 12 months and, the sales team. But again, we're the only one that can think about the longer term play. So there is a balance here to go into places in which you have a rich enough view into or penetration, let's say, into your ICP, that potentially in the room you will get the 5% that are in market, but also will be able to establish good relationship and get this kind of foot in the door to start a conversation for the future to be considered whenever they're ready to buy. I think the most important thing that we need to realize that changed in the market is that because of the economy, because of the stretch on buying software, it is really hard for us to force people to move into buying. When they're going to be ready to buy is on their own terms, when they have a compelling event. In our case, they might have a breach, maybe they're going through M&A, maybe they realize the vendor had a downtime and they're not happy now and they're looking to replace. But the reality is that it's on them. Whenever they're ready, though, they will already think about who am I looking out of the short list of companies. So going back to your question specifically about events and how to deal with that. If you are going into a large trade show, you need to think about what's your approach and how you will get to be in front of people that are potentially in the market to buy. Maybe you go into those that you recently talked with and reach out to them, email them with your activities, do an event just for them, check if they're going to be there. Kind of like at the end of the day, I always have this kind of, I'll jump for a second to how to prove ROI to my CFO. I always have this short-term mindset as well as the longer-term mindset. My goal is to be in front of as many people with as much of quality opportunity to open up a discussion. And that's my long-term goal. My CFO cares about opportunities created, closed as soon as possible. So I'm always trying to game the activities that we're going after. If we're going to do a CISO dinner with a company like yours, Misha, for example, I'm going to make sure you bring in people from my ideal customers, and I will try to have you vet them and see that potentially, let's say 2 out of the 20 CISOs that will be in the room have an identity project, so potentially could be, so I can say to my CFO, hey, we opened 2 opportunities that already justifies the cost of this dinner. Let's continue investing. At the same time, I met with another 18 and opened the door for future conversations. So I think we should all have this dual mindset of short-term helping sales and helping our CFO see the ROI immediately, while we have the kind of like broader spectrum of we look into the future and we need to build the future. The future will come, everybody will be happy, hopefully, at that time. So it's kind of like this dual play.
Absolutely. It makes sense. And kind of on the second one, the long-term play where you're meeting 18 CISOs, how do you think about attribution? Because if your SDR calls on those 18 CISOs and books 18 demos a year from that point, then that SDR would wants to get credit and get commission, even though the first conversation, the kind of the relationship was opened a year prior to that, and they may have been, I don't know, half a dozen touches interim. How do you think about attribution, who gets credit, and how much time to spend, if any, into really kind of digging into the numbers and playing with weights and to make sure that, well, we invest in the right programs and not see the end result, the last touch, the SDR, and this CFO may say, well, SDR program clearly is working. Why don't we hire from 10 to 100? Not understanding that there's all that work that happens upstream of that. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of place for education. If you're in a market when you have an average deal length of 6 to 9 to 12 months, throw away all this attribution stuff. Like at the end of the day, we are all in enterprise sales motion, which means multi-touch with multi-personas in the organization. And we are all for the win, which always makes couple of people involved and couple of touches. I mean, the website will work, content will work, couple of events. We have a big customer that came to 3 dinners and did multiple different touches with us and tried the free tools and did a lot of things before closing in a very large deal with us. That's the reality. So being kind of obsessed with attribution and who is the last touch versus the first touch is just silly, in my opinion. It wastes a lot of energy, causes a lot of friction instead of the opposite. Collaboration and thinking of how we actually surround the customers with more touches. It's not that I need to fight the SDR from having another touch and not paying him the commission. It's the opposite. I want him to pick up the phone and talk to the customer that have gone dark for a year and see if maybe now it's the right time. And of course, if he is successful, I want to pay his commission. Like, it's silly not to. So my thought is you need to track all the touches. You need to be less religious about this is more important. I have seen all those models of the W model, the Z model, the first and last. And so I think it's kind of random. People see us, and again, I'll remind what I was saying, it's not about us. They did not convert because the ebook was amazing. They convert because they have a project. The ebook was something they read to educate themselves when they were looking for the right solution. We had to have it, but like making the ebook the hero of the deal, and I've been in places that I've seen it, like attaching $1 million of a closed one to an ebook is just silly. An account of $1 million did not got closed one because of an ebook. It got closed one because of all the effort that was done, sales and marketing, to put ourselves in front of the account. So do measure what touches you have. Do measure, do a tally of how many touches, what type of touches are more successful. Do measure your ROI. If you're going to an event and it never brings you anything, don't go there, especially those that are expensive. But at the same time, don't start fighting and don't have this is mine and this is mine. Because the reality is, it takes the entire village of marketing, demand gen, PMMs, SDRs, sales to close, hundreds and thousands of dollars of ARR in software selling. It is what it is. So I think we should be less attached to it. Yeah, there is a conversation about how big the SDR team should be and what's the role. I think they have huge role to play in progressing, deals, checking out if you're ready. Maybe it's not completely cold outbound, depends on how well known your brand is. They have a role to play with helping us fill up the room when we have an event, for example. SDRs are great in that. So I think finding out the right size of SDR team for the right roles and being less of like, oh, we need to get more just because we think they closed this deal. Probably not a mature way to look at multi-touch complex deals.
Certainly. It's interesting. You brought out Zoom fatigue, that everyone is on Zoom calls every day, and it seems like every channel that works eventually gets so crowded that it stops performing.
Absolutely. LinkedIn was the thing, and then it got done.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when email was first introduced, and I think the response rate was 100% because it was novelty. It was not used for spam, and now I think the response rates are cut in half every year. So it's kind of a game of diminishing returns.
Absolutely.
I saw a post on LinkedIn that someone complained about getting 247 dinner invitations in 6 months. So dinners are getting overused. RSA, I'm sure you probably saw this big controversy with Palo Alto famously pulling out as a sponsor.
Wow.
Well, and it's clearly a company that can afford, one of the few companies that can afford and probably would notice sponsoring an event like this. So clearly, things that work, everyone piles in, and they don't work as well. So are you looking at any interesting alternative formats? What are you experimenting with in the live event space for 2025, if anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. And your point about, you start something, everybody else is doing it, and at a certain point, it's becoming too much. That's the story of success, I guess. And we all trying to improve our ROI, and that's why a lot of us move to CISO dinners, those type of activities. And yes, I think now people's time is also limited. I think it is really up for experimenting, and it's also really depends because we're talking about one-on-one, we're talking about time with people. It's very local, depends on the type of organization that you are selling to, depends on the location also. I'll give you an example. Chicago, we heard that some people, like, it's very tough to get people to dinners now in the evening because some people don't want to come, to the city after hours. Safety issues or so. San Francisco, similar. Versus I always, like, if I ever done an event in Des Moines, Iowa, 100% of the people show up. I guess competition is not that high and, they enjoy it. Events in Texas, people always show up. I usually have tons of success when I'm doing local events, awesome community. So I think you need to figure out the local behavior, the mix of people. I think things that always work, get those sports suite, hockey games, basketball games. People love it. Bring a plus one, have them enjoy and, spend time with you. I think we all need to experiment. I know that there are like over the top people shooting from planes and helicopters in black hat, and I heard all kinds. I did not try that. I think people still do a ton of golf events because people love it and get to spend time with you. There is a limitation to the amount of people you can golf with and talk with, but at the same time, your reps are spending a long time with them on the field. So I don't have a formula. I think it's very, very local. You need to have, a field team that works closely with the reps and closely with channel partners that know what's working in each and every territory. And of course, if you're international, Europe is so different than the US. So you have other things. I know that people are thinking a lot about, longer events, shorter events, weekend, all kinds of things. It's a time for experimentation and seeing what works. Um,
Mhm.
we have done our first Beyond Con, which was a customers and prospects event in New York City earlier this fall in September. It was a great success and also great pride for the team to be there to have our first customer event. And, we were very positively surprised by the energy and the engagement of people that stayed for a day and wanted to interact with a product managers, wanted to see demos. The sessions of a product team were ranked much higher than the luminary thought leaders in the industry. People wanted that. They said they want more time to see our demos. Maybe it's an insight for those watching our session. People, when they come to your branded event, probably know that you're going to pitch them the product. They chose it. They decided to come. So give it to them. They want to see. They came to learn about the tech. They already chose to spend time with you. So they understand it's going to be self-served and not just, an RSA with thought leadership.
Mhm.
It's kind of like they're in the mindset. It's like when they go to Falcon, they know that it's going to be seeing the latest and greatest from CrowdStrike, and they know that's what they're going for. So I'm thinking if you're doing your own event and people know that it's your own event, show the product, bring your product people, show the latest and greatest and enjoy the time with them, and don't just give them generic thought leadership because they can get it elsewhere.
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. It's certainly very useful insight. So hosting a user conference that you bring clients and prospects,
Yeah,
it's certainly a winning strategy. Well, it worked for Salesforce. I think Dreamforce is what 100,000 over 100,000 people in San
I wish
Francisco.
will get there. Yes.
One day. Lital, but kind of on this topic again to expand this thread. There's sometimes a dilemma whether to host your own events and use your own distribution list and your network of clients, or use a third party, whether it's Informa with Black Hat, or maybe some of the local conferences. There's Cyber Risk Alliance. It's probably CVision. There's so many vendors there of different sizes and different scope of events. And how do you think about this? Because if you host your own and if you're reaching out to a prospect, to your point, they know that they will get pitched. But if you work with a third party, then often it's clearly very expensive, and often you get in this questions. if you provide a list of accounts, will executive from those accounts show up? If
Yeah.
that vendor promises these are people with live projects, is it really the case, or they just want to have some stake? So there's always kind of this dilemma of host your own, and then you effectively somewhat limit your scope to those potential clients who are in the market, which is what you want to do. But if you want to make if you want to expand this and engage with other executives who are not in your orbit right now through third party, how do you do quality control and make sure you're not spending your time and budget and the time of your executives on something that ends up not being an effective use of your resources?
That's an excellent question. So first, I think to the question, doing it your own versus going with third party, I think like everything is a portfolio. I think about it that way. I want to do my own event when I actually first, I train my organization to work hard and get people in the room. My SDRs needs to work and find out and talk. It's a good muscle, and it's tough. I mean, we all talk about how hard it is to get butts in seats and get people engaged, and it's stressful. Like all of us marketeers, not knowing if anyone will show up, what will be the drop rate of from registration to attendance, like. I think we all have our kind of gray hair because of that. So I think this is important. I think once you're at a certain size of a company, try doing your own. Worst thing, you fail. Like try to build it in a way that failure is not the worst thing, that at least you get value, even, if attendance is low. So that's on that end. At the same time, because especially if you are a young startup and nobody knows you, and what are the chances people will show up at the door if they never heard about your brand, you need to rely on a third party that has already penetration in the market and can bring people to your event. How to vet it? Well, you do one and you see how it goes. Obviously, we all talk to each other. We have the cybersecurity marketing community, and we all have our ability to vet with our peers. I think that it's really important to have an open conversation with the vendor about what is it that you can guarantee versus what you're not willing to guarantee. And I think I will say to all the vendors that do it, be true. Like if you cannot guarantee that the CISO will show up, but you can guarantee that somebody from the say it. Like don't make a picture that is unrealistic, because you make a picture that is unrealistic, we're not going to come back. Like we want to do multiple events with vendors that deliver. So I think that's exactly the open conversation between a vendor that does those events to us about, okay, my expectation is that at least we'll get X amount of people from my ICP. Like I don't want, for example, government, or I don't want academic institutions because I cannot sell to them or they're not in my ICP. So let's not include them. And if I see that it's hard for you as a vendor to, commit to having, I want to have 50% of the room tech companies. Can you guarantee it? If not, that's fine. Some other vendors may have the penetration. Maybe it's not your sweet spot. So I would say to those of you that are kind of considering, think about what's your ideal ICP, what's the ideal short-term versus long-term scenario, and communicate and see what the vendor you're working with can bring you. I think that's the open conversations. And some of this works. And again, it's a portfolio. I think some events, sometimes you find out the day you scheduled is not a good day. You have a competing event. Something is happening. I don't know. We've been to an event the week of the election, and there was like, and we didn't think about it, and it wasn't that good. We should have thought about it. It's those kind of things. Events, as I said, they're super local. They can either work or not work. There's going to be a blizzard or some sort of emergency and the town is closed. What can we do? So those things happen. You need to plan for that and also treat your entire kind of plan as some of those events will flop, some will be super successful, and some will be somewhere in the middle. So I try to think about all my marketing activities as kind of like a year-long things. Some are better, some are worse. In general, I need to generate X amount of pipe. Some things will compensate for others.
Certainly, certainly. No, that makes sense. Well, I just want to, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I think it's super helpful because all those things are so nuanced and there's so many, it's kind of like baking a pie that you may even know the ingredients, with the proportions and the sequence. It's you need to, there's only one way to make it right and 10,000 ways to get it wrong. So I appreciate you sharing your insights. And just kind of to sum it up, if you make a list of insights, so one, look at the people you're convening as short-term and long-term. Short-term, if they have a project, they're probably likely to go into POC in 2 months. And long-term, they're qualified, they're within your ICP, but the contract may not come up for another 2 years, but still you want to have a conversation, you want to build this relationship. Number one. Number two, don't stress too much about attribution. Track all your touch points, but don't split hairs about assigning weights of who gets credit. Just be aware that it takes a village to close a deal. It's not just one white paper or one demo booked by SDR that actually closed the deal. It's all those touches and all that process along the way. Strategically use the short-term people who have intent for justification with the CFO and the board for certain programs. Have a mix of own events where you try different formats and whether it's user conference or event or smaller events and third party, and use them as pilots and double down on the ones that work, and so that you can discard those that don't. What did I miss?
Oh, and change as you go. I think the problem is that we have to kind of commit to our activities a long time in advance. Like when you go to RSA, they will make you book your spend for the next year, a year in advance. So the problem is that most of us don't have much of budget to shift around and play and double down on areas that we think that work. So as much as possible, leave yourself the freedom to change. It's tough. Also, my budget is already kind of like booked almost a year in advance, but think about it ahead of time. Our market changes all the time. Not having the freedom to play with moving things around is basically handcuffing us. So I think this year is going to be a big year of changes, and we will see some areas that are really working well. Leave yourself some room and some budget to be able to shift things around.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Tal, thank you so much. We're ready to open for Q&A. So if you have a question, unmute yourself, introduce, just say who you are, and ask a question. If not, I have plenty of my own, but I think it would be a good opportunity because we would really like to make it interactive, and in full transparency, we plan to host these conversations every month or so. So I hope it's useful. So with quite a few people, I'm counting on you to have questions for Lital.
Misha, thank you. Lital, the way that you described it, it was the interactions with the CISOs or the decision makers seemed predominantly focused on vendors of software or product rather than services. Do you see a difference in the approach that someone who's selling a vCISO service to a decision maker in these interactions?
Excellent question. Let me think about it. Primarily, I think it's especially the part that is like the one-on-one, the personal touch is probably similar because you want to interact with the decision maker, show them the value, basically get into this conversation that we lead to another conversation of, okay, let's get into what is it that you're offering me? How is it different? Why should I take you as a VC? So for example, versus getting my own or taking an MSSP or something else. So I think primarily it is similar. I think when you sell a software, it's intangible. The people that we are selling the software to, like the CISO, is actually not the user. And for him, he will need to articulate down to his team, or his team will need to go and test it. I think the beauty of service like a VC, so that you will maybe go and pitch it to a CEO or a board, so is that you are also the benefit that you're the product. So you may not need to sell it to a cohort of people the way we selling software need to, and kind of articulate different benefits. The benefit that we give the user is extremely different than the benefit that a software provides to, the decision maker, if that makes sense. I hope I answered your question, Jason.
Interesting perspective. Thank you.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
I think they're tossing it back to you, Misha. You always have good questions on these calls.
Appreciate it. Well, the question that I'm curious about, and then kind of going back to some of the formats that, whether it's dinners or large scale events that are true but tired. I see this trend of unconference instead of a conference with a deck and chairs. It's a retreat at a winery in Napa over the weekend, where you mix work and play, a bike ride in the morning and an instrument session with a thought leader in the afternoon, and then a cooking class where you do something with your hands with a master chef, and it's a kind of interactive. And it kind of cascades to smaller events as well. So it's, instead of a dinner, it's something that's more interactive. What are your thoughts on this trend, and have you tried, if anything, in that space? Or maybe what are you thinking in that area for 2025?
I have not tried it yet. I'm intrigued, I have to say. I think anything that get people together and get them excited to spend time and, relax and, open up and spend quality time is the way to go. So if, people are going to, a winery in Napa or a ski trip, and in the meantime, they will show up for an hour of learning about tech, for sure, great. Can my company afford it? Depends. We need to check. Not all of us can afford those kind of luxury treatments, for sure. I think it fits into people are looking to spend quality time in general. Maybe I'll tie it back to the Zoom fatigue. One of my best sellers at Hunters, whenever we got a qualified inbound demo request on a website, he would reply to the inbound demo request saying, hey, I saw you reached out and you wanted the demo, but you know what? I'm in your town next week. Why don't we meet up for coffee? And he will fly. He's not going to do a Zoom. Because I'm sure that the attention and actually spending the time with the prospect will make a difference. If somebody is coming inbound, it means that he probably has a project in the next 9 months he's considering. Maybe he's putting a short list. He will put you higher in the short list if you actually spend time with him. So it makes sense. So for me, is it the Napa Valley versus just my CEO or the sales rep going and having coffee with a real prospect? I think at the end of the day, people want to meet with real people. What makes a difference when buying software is, and that's what a company like smaller, like mine, offers when we compete against a Microsoft and an Okta. We give the promise that the real human being will take care of your ticket and it's going to be in time, and somebody will get on the phone, and it's not going to be a call center or a chat bot. So let's prove it to them. That's what startups can do. We can hop on a plane and actually meet and actually spend time. So is it the experience? Maybe, but it could be as inexpensive as just, actually going and having coffee, having your CEO, your CTO, your co-founder, an investor that is in the neighborhood to meet and talk. I think that is what makes the difference. The extra activity is just, the veneer and the excuse to get them enticed.
It's such a great insight, and I think if we start not looking at people as MQLs and SQLs and whatever
Yes.
we can come up with, but see them as real human beings and treat them as such, and focus on shaking hands and breaking bread and caring and giving first before taking, I think it will go a long way. And I think it's such an awesome example.
I just want to say, we all need to remember that the original salesman was the guy that was knocking on people's doors and, coming up with whatever, the encyclopedia or the whatever he was selling to the housewife in the home. And he was spending time with her. That was the whole thing. He was telling about the benefit of the product that he's bringing, and she would have a coffee with him and chat. That salesmanship, it is about relationship. I think with all technology and marketing automation and SDR sequences and all, we kind of like lost it. Hey, people don't want to get an email written by ChatGPT. It's not something that they're interested in. If I'm going to spend $1 million on your software, it may cost me my job. So I need to trust you. I need to trust the CEO of your company. And you know what? It's nice that you came by to meet with me. And if it is a vacation in Napa, even better.
For sure. Awesome. That's such a great insight, Lital. Thank you for sharing. Anyone would have a question? I know you're thinking about 2025. I know it's scratching your head on where to put your chips. Now is the time, now or never.
Lital, I would just ask if I could, some pitfalls to avoid in thinking of all of this. I know that in your very stellar career, you've seen excellent success, and then you've seen areas where you're like, okay, mental note, make sure that those are avoided in the future. But I think, we all tend to learn from failure. So understanding some might help the rest of the people on the call.
Oh, wow. So many. I think we tend to underestimate the logistic uplift in many of those programs we get ourselves into. I do want to say Suzanne is on my team, and she's the master of doing all our dimension and all our beautiful field activities that we do. And she will know, you will know, Suzanne, more than anyone, that every activity has a bunch of tasks and sometimes unrealistic time frame and unrealistic, workload makes everything impossible. I think too often we don't give ourselves enough time to execute well. And I'm the first to be blamed at that. I'm kind of like, I get stressed. We need to have more. So let's book an event next month. But there is not enough time to find the right location and to put the landing page and to communicate and to promote it and do paid and do everything well. Marketing is an orchestration of a lot of things, and for execution to be amazing and to be to bring the outcomes, we need to appreciate the complexity of everything we're doing and the time it takes. There are no shortcuts. And if we're trying to make shortcuts, it always execution just is impacted. So this is what I think we all need to appreciate. Sometimes it is better to give it to a third party just because your team is too small and there is too much for you to grab. You will not be able to do it. I wouldn't do an event like we have done with BeyondCon if I hadn't thinking that we have a big enough team to undertake that and we have sufficient time to run all the activities. So that's, I think, something I failed miserably not planning in the past for the logistics, for enough time, for everything it takes to make a good program a successful one.
Interesting. Where I come from, we call these projects sunrise in manual mode. So when the timeline is too short, and it's really unrealistic expectations. Yeah. So when you making the sun go up and by hand. So this is awesome. So Lital, I know you have a podcast of your own.
I do. I have a podcast not of my own with my husband. We have a podcast called the Didi and Lital Show. We talk over there about security. My husband is in the identity field as well. So a mix of episode about marketing, general thoughts about life, and cybersecurity in general trends. So check it out. And if you want to be on the show, reach out to me. We'd love to have people that coming from the industry that have their own kind of experience to share their thoughts. I know, Misha, I'd love to have you on the podcast. We'll schedule time for you to come in. And yeah, check it out and let me know if you like it.
Happy to chat. And we'll, if it's okay, we'll put a link to your podcast in the show notes for this discussion, so people can will be able to find it, and we'll share with everyone on the call as well. We actually, I know we're coming up on time, and just to be conscious of everyone's time, we plan to host these sessions on various topics, everything cybersecurity marketing, every month or so. So everyone on the call, stay tuned. And Lital, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts. I think now is the time to put them to use as people are making decisions about 2025. And you're welcome anytime.
Thanks, Misha. I really appreciate the time, and I appreciate the time of everyone that joined in.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you for your time. This was awesome.
Good luck in 2025.